Hello. This video we are going to look at the organisation of your nervous system, and this will be accompanied by a PDF which will be in the following file, or may even be in this file, who knows. So typically when we think of the central nervous system, we don't consider the eyes, but they are very much a part of the central nervous system. I think they don't usually get included because authors of textbooks are worried that it might freak people out a bit, but there we go. So what we see here is the totality of what we call your central nervous system. And this is where all sensory information is relayed back to. So you have sensory neurons of varying different types positioned all over your body, and they are basically relaying information from the external environment. So maybe the temperature of the room that you're in, the wind on your face, anything, the brightness of the room, things that you hear, but also your internal environment, so muscle tone, blood pressure, breathing rate, things like that, things that you don't necessarily have to think about so much. And that information all comes back to the central nervous system, which we typically think of as being comprised of by the brain and the spinal cord. Now, this incoming information can take one of two routes. It will either feed in to the spinal cord here, which is this long strip of nerves bundled together, and travel up to the brain where it is processed or integrated, and then a sensory output is made. So a sort of a decision, if you like, is made on what to do. So you may be sitting in a room and think, it's a bit too hot or a bit too cold, so you go and adjust the temperature. If, however, you are cooking a meal and you lean on a hot hob, put your hand on it, and you instantly take your hob away, your hand away, that is because the sensory information has fed in to the base of the spinal cord, but has not then travelled up, because that would take time, obviously not much time, but it would still take a small amount of time, of extra time, for that information to go up here, for you to think, I'm leaning on a hob, whatever shall I do? And that's going to cause more damage. So instead, the information is fed into the base of the spinal cord, and that information is integrated there, and a action is taken, and this is a reflex response. So when people say don't think about it, if you're learning a new activity or a new sport, they're basically trying to get you to develop a new reflex response. So this relates to everything. When learning a new skill, for example, to begin with, when you're learning a new skill, be it walking or trying to kick a ball or trying to practice a new martial art, that information is being integrated up to your cerebral cortex. You're thinking, right, what shall I do? How shall I position myself? How fast do I need to move my arms, my legs, and so on? You want to get to a stage where you know it so well that this information becomes a reflex. Anyway, so the basic anatomy. So the uppermost region of the brain, or the outermost region of your brain, is called the cerebrum. And you have two hemispheres, the left, which is over here on your right, and the right hemisphere. And this is because this image is in the anatomical position, and we always describe the position of someone's anatomy from the user's position, from the participant or individual's position. So this is the left side, this is the right side, so your two hemispheres of your brain. This small region here at the base of the brain towards the back is the cerebellum. This is involved in a huge range of processes, but in our sport and exercise world we will come to know it for having a role in coordinating balance and movement. Obviously your eyes are part of your nervous system. They process visual sensory information, and these structures which are hanging here, so we have the optic nerve and the olfactory nerve, so this is how you're able to smell this information from here. It's fed up from here from these specialist nerves. And then down here we have the midbrain and the spinal cord. So this crucial structure, so I'm trying to zoom at an appropriate level, is housed obviously in a very protective uh, bony structure. So the cranium, the skull, houses the brain, and the spinal cord is housed within your vertebrae. So there is one of the most protected organs in the body, and rightfully so. Cup of tea. So your nervous system is able to give rise to your senses. We tend to think of the human body as having 5 senses, and I will try and remember them now. Sight, sound, taste, touch, and hearing. But that's not true. Depending on which textbook you read and on how a sense is classified within that textbook, you have anywhere from 18 to 21 senses. And this should be intuitively obvious when you start to think about it. You can sense temperature. That's a sense. And you can sense temperature both internally and externally, in your body and outside of your body. You have an emotional sense. You can feel love, happiness, sadness, angst, and so on. You have a sense of balance and coordination. You have a sense known as proprioception, and we will come to discuss this in more detail when we do sport and exercise biomechanics. But proprioception is basically your body's ability to be able to know the position that your limbs are in without having to look at them. So you can do this yourself now if you so wish. You can pause the video and without looking down, if you're sitting up in a chair or if you're lying down, you should be able to describe the position that your limbs are in. So is your elbow flexed at 90 degrees, are your knees flexed, ankles, so on, without having to look. And that's a crucial sense to maintaining to maintaining balance and improving skills and coordination and so on. And it's obviously a sense that we lose as we begin to age. So this is your central nervous system. This is where all information in terms of sensory information is integrated. That's basically to say a decision is made about it from the wider nervous system. So let's add in the peripheral nervous system, and here we start to get a bit more complex. Now this isn't a complete overview of your peripheral nervous system. These are just the primary nerves that make up the peripheral nervous system. So these are nerves that are outside of the spinal cord and the brain. So when I refer to nerves, nerves are basically bundles of neurons. Okay, so you could think of it if your brain is a computer and you have a very complex computer and you have lots of wires coming out of your computer and it looks rather unpleasant. You can get those cords that you can wrap around to bundle all of these wires together to make them look a bit neater. That would be a nerve, whereas the individual wires would be neurons. And so your peripheral nervous system is able to the central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is subdivided, and it's subdivided into 3 different divisions. And as I say, don't worry, I will attach a PDF with this information on. My favourite and the most overlooked, and this doesn't have a huge amount to do with sport and exercise science, but I just like discussing it, is the enteric nervous system, the ENS. This is perhaps the part of the nervous system that you haven't heard so much about, but the enteric nervous system, which isn't represented here, lines your digestive system, specifically the stomach and the intestines. And in everyday terms, it gives us what we refer to as the gut feeling about something. And if you think of this from an evolutionary point of view, your ancient ancestor may be roaming through a jungle or across the savannah, and just out of the corner of their eye, they notice, I don't know, some sort of large animal which could potentially be a threat, but they don't see it well enough to really be consciously aware of it. That information is still processed, and instead of then being sent to the brain, it's sent to the enteric nervous system, which starts to contract and relax the stomach to give us this, as I say, this gut feeling. It's an involuntary response. You have no conscious control over it. But in everyday terms, we could perhaps relate this to if we've ever made a bad decision in life, or I don't know, if you've got back together with an ex, you think, brilliant, this is great, and seconds later you feel this feeling in the bottom of your stomach, or if you've got a job that you think, I just don't want to do this, you feel this gut feeling that just, things aren't right, and I can't figure out why. It's your enteric nervous system. It's the same process that saved your ancient ancestor from a saber-toothed tiger lurking in a bush that they didn't quite see. So it's the same reason you should leave that job or break up with your ex, because you know they were your ex for a reason. It's a silly example, but it's nonetheless true. The branches of your nervous system that or your peripheral nervous system that you may be aware of are your somatic and your autonomic nervous system. So the SNS, somatic nervous system, and the ANS, the autonomic nervous system. We'll start with the somatic. This is the part of your nervous system of which you have conscious control over to some degree. So specifically skeletal muscles. You have some control over your skeletal muscles, not total control, because that would be too much. You need to give ownership of your muscle actions over to your nervous system, your autonomic nervous system sometimes, because you being consciously aware of all of your muscles all the time would just be too demanding. So, but you do have some conscious control over your muscular system. So that is regulated by the somatic nervous system in part. The autonomic nervous system, the ANS, makes up the automatic portion of your nervous system. So you have no control over this. This is basically the portion of your nervous system which is regulated by your nervous system, but not on a conscious level. So I often think that it's ironic that despite the fact that we have this conscious awareness, we have no idea of the majority of what's been taking place in our body at any one time. So this would be, for example, your cardiac muscle tissue, the muscle tissue in your heart, the smooth muscle tissue, the secretion of hormones from glands, for example. Your breathing rate is automatically controlled, but sometimes it switches over to the somatic nervous system. I bet just because I've mentioned this, you're now suddenly thinking about your breathing rate, but eventually you'll stop thinking about it. And if you were to just have somatic control over your breathing, then you would suddenly gasp because you'd forgot to breathe. So you need to allow some level of autonomic control over that that function. So the central nervous system, just to recap, is comprised of the brain and the spinal cord there. The peripheral nervous system is everything outside of the brain and the spinal cord. So these are all the cranial nerves, these are all the spinal nerves here. And the peripheral nervous system is divided into three different areas. The somatic, the area you have control of, skeletal muscles. The autonomic, the area that you don't have conscious control of. And the enteric, you don't have conscious control over it, and that is what gives you your gut feeling. So as I say, I will attach a schematic image of this below just to help you out, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the gross anatomy of your nervous system.